Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a highly charged broadcast from commentator Erin Molan. We're going to completely strip away the noise and look objectively at how she connects some massive, complex issues. We're talking international diplomacy all the way down to domestic justice. The source material we're looking at today covers an incredibly wide spectrum of current events. But instead of just reading you a list of what was said, we're really going to dig right into the underlying arguments. We want to understand the exact framework the broadcast uses to make sense of a pretty chaotic world so you can clearly grasp the core perspectives being shared.
Okay, let's dive into this. We've synthesized this broadcast into 4 cohesive pillars. 1. Diplomacy in the Middle East. 2. Shifting stances in media. 3. Western politics and leadership. And 4. Crime and the justice system.
Section 1. Diplomacy in the Middle East.
Right out of the gate, the analysis tackles Donald Trump's stated one-week deadline to reach a new deal with Iran. Now, think about the sheer scale of geopolitical negotiations for a second. Unraveling decades of really complex, deeply entrenched regional conflict, that is a massive undertaking. The broadcast reports on this specific 7-day time frame, but right away expresses some deep skepticism about whether it's actually feasible. The argument here is that, sure, setting deadlines is a pretty standard negotiating tactic, but in this specific, highly volatile context, the likelihood of an actual legitimate agreement getting ironed out in just 1 week is, well, close to zero.
Molan actually doesn't mince words here. She literally calls it doing a deal with the devil. Her core argument is that you simply cannot negotiate in good faith with the current Iranian regime. She posits that because the regime operates as a state sponsor of terrorism, they fundamentally lack both the legitimacy and, frankly, the intent to honor any diplomatic agreements. The overarching worldview presented here is that true, lasting deals are really only going to be possible if and when the Iranian people take back their country and entirely replace the current leadership. Anything else, the broadcast suggests, is basically just a band-aid.
And this brilliantly illustrates a crucial chain of influence outlined by Marco Rubio, which the broadcast highlights to explain exactly why direct negotiations often fail. It forces us to realize that, it's not always just nation versus nation. The framework looks like this. Iran backs Hezbollah. Hezbollah then operates from inside Lebanese territory to attack Israelis, and ultimately Hezbollah inflicts tremendous collateral damage on the Lebanese people themselves. So the broadcast uses this to argue that the root of the conflict isn't just a direct state-to-state war between Israel and Lebanon. Instead, it's these proxy forces heavily funded by Iran that intentionally destabilize the entire region. When you view the conflict through this proxy lens, the hesitation to negotiate directly with Iran makes a whole lot more sense.
Sticking with Iran for a moment, the broadcast then shifts to a highly mocking tone regarding recent threats made by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' Navy toward vessels in the Strait of Hormuz. Molan actually quips that their Navy is essentially missing in action, joking that it's currently sitting at the bottom of the ocean after recent conflicts. But, this mockery actually serves a very specific strategic purpose in her argument. She is completely dismissing their ability to deliver any kind of firm response. It raises the question, if their military apparatus is effectively a joke, why on earth should Western powers treat them as an equal or formidable negotiating partner at the diplomatic table?
Moving right along to Section 2. Shifting stances in media.
Now, what's really interesting here is the direct juxtaposition of 2 very contrasting statements from media commentator Megyn Kelly. On one hand, we've got her recent remarks questioning if pro-Israel, anti-Muslim rhetoric is manipulative, while explicitly noting that she's seeing a new influx of Muslim viewers. But on the exact opposite side, we have statements she made just 4 months prior, where she firmly argued that Islam is not consistent with Western values. The source uses this really stark ideological whiplash to highlight what it views as a dramatic, rapid, and highly calculated shift in the media landscape.
The broadcast uses this specific pivot to launch a much broader critique, essentially arguing that Kelly is following the path of Tucker Carlson. Molan asserts that major commentators are intentionally abandoning their supposedly deeply held convictions to pander to larger, international audiences, specifically growing Muslim viewership bases globally. She accuses them of being willing to, quote, ditch your integrity because there's more who stand against us than with us. It really forces us as viewers to ask a pretty uncomfortable question. Are the opinions we hear on primetime driven by genuine conviction, or are they entirely shaped by algorithms, audience capture, and viewership metrics?
All right, Section 3, Western Politics and Leadership.
The broadcast singles out UK Tory leader Kemi Badenoch for immense praise here. Badenoch takes a very firm, completely unapologetic stance against antisemitism, stating unequivocally that she is telling the truth and will always stand behind Jewish people.
Molan highlights this as a courageous, refreshing defense of core Western values in a UK climate that the broadcast perceives as becoming increasingly hostile to those very principles. Badenoch is presented as the prime example of what principled political leadership should look like, someone refusing to bow to shifting cultural tides. Let's move to and see how this builds, because the broadcast immediately contrasts Badenoch's steadfastness with an entirely different approach from U.S. politician Joe Kent. Kent argues that we have to cut a deal now, and that there's no military solution to the conflict. Well, Molan critically points out that this rhetoric almost perfectly mirrors the official public relations statements coming directly from the Iranian regime. Think about the implications of that argument for a second. The broadcast is essentially accusing a domestic U.S. politician of parroting the talking points of a foreign adversary under the guise of diplomacy.
The broadcast then extends this critique of Western policy to international organizations, specifically UNRWA. It reports the assertion that the United States found at least 4 UNRWA members who were active participants in the October 7th attacks. Now, this isn't just a random statistic thrown in. It's an absolutely crucial data point for the overarching geopolitical thesis. It validates the host's long-held skepticism regarding the neutrality of UN humanitarian branches. The argument is that if domestic politicians can be compromised, so too can the very international bodies we trust to provide aid and maintain global stability.
Finally, Section 4, Crime and the Justice System. We will now shift our focus entirely away from global politics to examining two deeply sobering domestic realities.
The first case involves an alleged mass shooter at a Cole Allen White House event. The broadcast reports, with clear disbelief and frustration, that the presiding judge actually apologized to the defendant for the restrictions he faced while placed on suicide watch. To the host, this is not just some bizarre courtroom anomaly. It is presented as a glaring symptom of a much larger philosophical issue. A justice system that has completely lost its moral compass, inexplicably prioritizing the comfort and feelings of a violently accused individual over the immense gravity of their alleged crimes. It's presented as a world turned completely upside down.
The final case discussed in the broadcast is profoundly devastating. It concerns the trial of Tanner Lynn Horner, a FedEx driver convicted of the kidnapping and murder of a 7-year-old girl named Athena. The details presented are unimaginably grim, centering heavily on the mention of an hour-long, highly disturbing audio recording recovered from inside the FedEx van that captured the young victim fighting for her life. The broadcast handles this with a raw, undeniable weight, forcing the audience to confront the absolute darkest realities of domestic crime.
The mandatory legal outcome handed down by the court was the death penalty. But while impartially reporting this final legal reality, the host notes her own overwhelming distress regarding the case. She explores the agonizing concept that sometimes human justice falls completely short of true restitution. She asserts that even the ultimate punishment of death feels entirely insufficient given the horrifying, calculated cruelty of this specific crime against a child.
So, the crucial point is, after unpacking all of this, we are left with a massive question. How do the shifting narratives in media and politics ultimately shape our pursuit of justice and global stability? From the intricacies of Middle Eastern diplomacy and the questionable loyalties of primetime media figures, all the way to the stark, heavy realities inside our domestic courtrooms, the broadcast we unpack today paints a highly complex picture of our current era. I invite you to reflect on how these seemingly disparate themes, power, truth, and accountability, intersect and influence the world around us. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.